The grandfather clock in the corner of the living room ticked with a slow, rhythmic finality, the only sound in the otherwise breathless quiet of my apartment. I sat in my favorite velvet armchair, the one my daughter Sarah had bought me for my 70th birthday. I was 72 now. My name is Margaret Hills, and for the better part of 4 decades, I had been the foundation, the scaffolding, and the emergency fund for my family. But tonight, as I looked at the piece of paper trembling slightly in my hand, I wasn't a mother, or an ex-wife, or a savior. I was just a woman who had finally woken up. In my right hand was a crystal glass of Merlot, poured a little heavier than usual. In my left was a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the unmistakable embossed logo of the First National Bank. The letter inside wasn't addressed to me, though it was mailed to my legal address. It was addressed to my son, Jason, and the word stamped across the top in bold, unforgiving black ink read, "Foreclosure." I took a slow sip of the wine. It tasted like dark cherries and oak, but mostly it tasted like freedom. I didn't panic. My chest didn't tighten the way it used to whenever Jason found himself in trouble. My phone, sitting on the coffee table, was completely silent. I knew he was out there right now, probably scrambling, probably terrified, realizing that the safety net he had spent his entire adult life bouncing on had finally been cut. To understand how a mother could sit in the quiet comfort of her home and calmly drink wine while her 35-year-old son faced financial ruin, you have to understand the decades of bleeding that preceded it. They say that as a black woman in America, you are born with an invisible cape draped over your shoulders. You are expected to be strong. You are expected to endure. When my husband Robert walked out on us 20 years ago to find his authentic self, which apparently resided in a sports car and a string of younger women, I didn't have the luxury of falling apart. Jason was 15 at the time, right at that fragile age where a boy can either harden into a man or shatter into a million jagged pieces. I chose to protect him. I worked double shifts as a hospital administrator. I skipped my own dental appointments to pay for his basketball camps. I drained the first layer of my retirement savings to put him through a state college that he ultimately dropped out of. I was driven by that relentless, suffocating thing called mom guilt. I convinced myself that because he grew up in a broken home, because his father was a fleeting shadow who only showed up for holidays and photo ops, it was my sacred duty to shield Jason from the harsh edges of the world. When he was 30 and claimed the job market was rigged against him, I dipped into my savings again to buy the 3-bedroom ranch house on Sycamore Drive. "Just to get you on your feet, baby," I had told him, signing the mortgage papers as the primary guarantor. When his car broke down, I bought the Honda. I paid the insurance. I paid the property taxes. I was the silent, invisible engine powering the illusion of his adulthood. But illusions, no matter how much money you pour into them, eventually crack. The crack turned into a shattering glass window last Sunday. It was supposed to be a normal family dinner at the house on Sycamore, the house I paid for. I had spent all morning preparing a standing rib roast, Jason's favorite, and carried it carefully in my ceramic dish up the driveway. When I walked in, the air in the house felt entirely different. The warm, earthy tones I had helped Jason pick out for the living room had been painted over with a sterile, icy gray. Sitting on my couch, legs tucked beneath her in a posture of practiced elegance, was Chloe. Chloe was Robert's newest wife. At 38, she was only 3 years older than my son, a fact that never stopped turning my stomach. She was a self-proclaimed spiritual life coach, a woman who dressed exclusively in beige linen and spoke entirely in the kind of psychological buzzwords she scavenged from social media. Robert sat beside her, looking older than his 74 years, nodding along to whatever she was saying. And then there was Jason, my son. He didn't come to the kitchen to help me with the heavy roasting pan. He barely looked up from his phone when I walked in. "Maggie, you brought meat," Chloe said, her voice dripping with that fake, honeyed concern she always used to patronize me. "You know, Jason and I have been discussing the heavy, toxic energy of processed animal trauma. We're trying to elevate the vibration in this space." I forced a polite smile, feeling the familiar ache in my knees as I set the heavy pan on the granite counter. "Jason has loved my rib roast since he was 10 years old, Chloe. I think his vibration will survive dinner." Jason finally looked up, his jaw set in a hard, defiant line. "Actually, Mom, Chloe's right. You never listen. You just barrel in here doing what you want to do, forcing your old habits on me." I froze, the potholder still in my hand. It was a small comment, but there was a venom in his tone that I wasn't used to. I brushed it off, playing the peacemaker, the role I had rehearsed for a lifetime. But as the evening dragged on, the atmosphere around the dining table grew increasingly suffocating. Sarah, my eldest daughter, sat quietly next to me, her eyes darting nervously between her brother and me. Sarah had always been the independent one, the one who paid her own bills and never asked for a dime, and the one I admittedly took for granted because she didn't need rescuing. As we picked at the dinner, which Chloe had supplemented with a tasteless raw kale salad, the conversation turned to Jason's career. He had recently quit his 4th job in 3 years, claiming the management didn't respect his boundaries. "So what's the plan now, Jason?" I asked, keeping my voice gentle, neutral. "The property taxes are due next month, and you know I'm on a fixed income now. I need to know you can cover your half of the utilities this time." The silence that followed was so thick you could have cut it with a steak knife. Chloe sighed, a long, dramatic sound, and reached across the table to place her hand over Jason's. "Margaret," she said, her tone suddenly adopting the cadence of a grief counselor, "we are trying to protect Jason's peace right now. Bringing up money at the dinner table is a very low-vibrational, controlling tactic. It's financial abuse, really. You use your money to keep him tethered to you." I stared at her, genuinely stunned. "Excuse me? Financial abuse? I bought this house to keep him from living in a motel." I looked at Robert, expecting him to intervene, to defend the woman who had raised his son while he was off playing bachelor. But Robert just stared at his plate, a coward to his very core. Then Jason spoke. He leaned forward, his eyes narrowed, staring at me, not like a son looks at a mother, but like a warden looks at an annoying prisoner. "She's right, Mom. You don't help me because you love me. You help me because you have a savior complex. You need me to be broken so you can feel important." The words struck my chest like physical blows. "Jason," I whispered, the air leaving my lungs. "No, let me speak," he interrupted, his voice rising, bouncing off the walls I had paid to paint. "You've always been miserable. Ever since Dad left, you've just been this heavy, depressing weight. You try to control everything I do. You're a loser, Mom. You really are. You have no life of your own, so you try to buy mine." He turned to Chloe, his expression softening into something sickeningly devoted. "Chloe is more of a mother to me than you ever were. She actually sees me. She understands my potential without demanding a receipt for it." Sarah gasped, dropping her fork. "Jason, shut your mouth. Are you out of your mind? She pays for the roof over your head." "I didn't ask her to," Jason shouted back, slamming his hand on the table. The crystal glasses rattled. "She forced it on me to stroke her own ego." I sat perfectly still. In the movies, this is the moment where the mother cries. This is the moment she screams, or begs for respect, or throws a glass of wine in a dramatic fit of rage. But real heartbreak doesn't look like that. Real heartbreak is entirely silent. I felt a strange, cold sensation wash over me, starting from the crown of my head and trickling down to my aching joints. It was the feeling of an invisible cord snapping. The heavy, suffocating cape of the strong black mother unclasped from my neck and fell to the floor. I looked at Jason, really looked at him. I saw the entitlement in his 35-year-old eyes. I saw the smug, victorious smirk on Chloe's face at the end of the table. I saw Robert's pathetic, averted gaze. For 35 years, I had poured my lifeblood into a bottomless well, hoping that one day, love would echo back up. In that frozen second, I realized it never would. I was not nurturing a son. I was funding a parasite. I didn't argue. I didn't defend my sacrifices. I slowly pushed my chair back. The wood scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. "Margaret, don't walk away," Chloe said, her voice dripping with faux pity. "Running away is a trauma response. We need to hold space for this healing." "I am going home," I said. My voice was dangerously quiet, completely devoid of the warmth they had exploited for decades. I didn't look at Jason. I looked at Sarah, offering her a tiny, reassuring nod. "Thank you for the company, Sarah." I walked out of the dining room, but as I went into the kitchen to retrieve my wool coat from the back of the door, I realized I had left my car keys on the counter near the patio. The sliding glass door to the backyard was open just a crack, letting in the crisp autumn air. I reached for my keys, but a sound stopped my hand in midair. It was voices. Jason and Chloe had stepped out onto the back patio to have a cigarette, a habit Jason had sworn to me he had quit 5 years ago. I stood in the shadows of my own kitchen, barely breathing, and listened. "You did great, babe," Chloe's voice murmured in the dark, stripped completely of its spiritual, airy-fairy tone. She sounded sharp, calculating, like a corporate shark. "I don't know, Chloe," Jason replied, sounding suddenly nervous, like a little boy who had just broken a window. "She looked really cold. What if she stops paying the utilities?" "Let her," Chloe scoffed. "That's exactly what we want. If she thinks you don't need her money, her ego will panic, but she'll pull back. Once she's emotionally disconnected, we bring your dad in. We convince him to talk her into selling this house. The market is peaking right now, Jason. If she sells, you're entitled to half the equity as the resident. That's at least $200,000. That's the seed money for my wellness retreat center. We can't do that if she's hovering over this property like a hawk." "She loves this house," Jason said weakly. "She views it as my inheritance." "She's desperate for your approval," Chloe corrected him, striking a match. I smelled the sulfur, then the bitter tang of tobacco. "She's a lonely, guilty old woman. You hit her right where it hurts tonight. You established dominance. Give it a week of silence and she'll be begging to buy her way back into your good graces. Then we pitch the sale of the house as a fresh start for your relationship." I stood there in the dark kitchen, the keys biting into the palm of my hand. They weren't just ungrateful, they were orchestrating a heist. Chloe, the woman who preached about toxic energy, was manipulating my son's deep-seated daddy issues to force the sale of the only major asset I had left to my name, all to fund her delusional business venture. And my son, the boy I had rocked to sleep through fevers, the boy whose broken bones I had paid to set, the man whose life I was currently financing, was a willing accomplice, ready to strip me bare just to impress a woman who was using him. I didn't burst out onto the patio. I didn't scream. I didn't demand an explanation. When you discover that the house you've been lovingly maintaining is entirely infested with termites, you don't yell at the bugs. You step outside, you lock the door, and you call the exterminator. I slipped my coat on, walked silently out the front door, and got into my car. The drive back to my apartment was a blur of streetlights and shadows. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't shed a single tear. By the time I put my key into the lock of my apartment door, the grieving mother inside me was dead and buried. In her place was someone else entirely, someone who had kept every single receipt. Now, as I sit here on this Tuesday evening, looking at the foreclosure notice, I feel the corners of my mouth turn up into a smile I haven't worn in years. They wanted independence. They wanted boundaries. They thought my money was a chain keeping them down. Tomorrow morning, they were going to learn what happens when the bank, not a mother, holds the leash. Monday morning arrived with a cold, pale sunlight that sliced through the blinds of my bedroom. For the first time in 35 years, I did not wake up thinking about my son. I did not check my phone for panicked text messages about overdrawn accounts or broken water heaters. I woke up, stretched my aching back, and felt an unfamiliar, magnificent emptiness. I walked into the kitchen and brewed a pot of coffee. Black. No cream, no sugar. I didn't need anything sweet today. After breakfast, I unlocked the heavy oak filing cabinet in my home office. Inside was the meticulously organized paper trail of my life's greatest mistake. I pulled out the thick manila folder labeled Sycamore House and another labeled Jason, Auto and Insurance. I sat at my desk, tracing my fingers over the original mortgage documents, the property tax receipts, the endless ledger of wire transfers. My name, Margaret Hayes, was stamped on every single line of financial responsibility. Jason's name was only there as the occupant, a courtesy title that carried no weight, no risk, and no obligation. I placed the folders into my leather tote bag, picked up my car keys, and drove downtown to the law offices of Vance & Associates. Eleanor Vance was a woman who did not waste words. At 58, she had silver hair cropped into a sharp bob, piercing blue eyes, and a reputation as one of the most ruthless family and estate attorneys in the state. She had handled my divorce from Robert 2 decades ago, securing my pension when Robert had tried to claim half of it to fund his midlife crisis. She knew my history, she knew my family, and most importantly, she knew the law. I sat in the stiff leather chair across from her massive mahogany desk and placed the folders down between us. "Good morning, Margaret," Eleanor said, folding her hands over her notepad. "You sounded remarkably calm on the phone yesterday. Usually, Sunday evening calls to my emergency line involve tears or police sirens. No tears, Eleanor, I said, my voice steady. And no sirens, at least not yet. I need to financially sever myself from my son, completely and permanently. I want my name off the Sycamore house. I want my name off his car. And I want a formal revocation of any and all financial support. If he wants to be an independent man, I am going to grant him his wish. Eleanor raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She didn't ask why. She just reached for the Sycamore folder and opened it, scanning the original deed and the mortgage agreement. The car is easy, Eleanor said, her eyes darting across the pages. You hold the title. We can legally demand he return the property or sign the title over to him and remove you from the insurance liability. But the house is complicated, Margaret. You are the primary guarantor. You own the property, even if he lives there. You can't just remove your name from a mortgage. You either have to sell the property, or Jason has to refinance it in his own name. And given his employment history, no bank is going to approve him for a mortgage. Then I will stop paying it, I said flatly. Let the bank foreclose. Eleanor stopped reading and looked up at me, her expression turning deadly serious. Margaret, you have pristine credit. A foreclosure will tank your credit score. It will remain on your record for 7 years. Are you truly willing to burn your own financial standing just to teach him a lesson? I am 72 years old, Eleanor, I replied, leaning forward. My retirement is fully funded in cash and secure bonds. My apartment is paid off. I own my car outright. I don't need a credit score to buy a television or take a vacation. My credit score is a hostage Jason has been holding a gun to for years. I am telling you to shoot the hostage. A slow, appreciative smile crept onto Eleanor's face. All right then. Before we draft the severance and the eviction notices, let me pull a comprehensive credit report and property lien check, just to make sure there are no surprises attached to the Sycamore address. Give me 5 minutes. She turned to her computer, her manicured fingers flying across the keyboard. I sat back, sipping the sparkling water her assistant had brought me, feeling lighter by the minute. Then the clicking stopped. The silence in the office shifted. It wasn't the comfortable silence of legal paperwork. It was the sudden, heavy silence of a bomb being discovered. Eleanor stared at her monitor. The faint blue light reflected off her glasses. Her lips pressed together into a thin, grim line. Margaret, she said softly. The tone of her voice made the hairs on my arms stand up. When did you authorize a second mortgage on the Sycamore house? I frowned, gripping the armrests of my chair. I didn't. I paid a 20% down payment 10 years ago, and I've paid the primary mortgage every month since. There is no second mortgage. Eleanor turned her monitor so I could see it. According to the county registry and your Equifax report, 14 months ago, a home equity line of credit, a HELOC, was taken out against the Sycamore property in the amount of $75,000. The line has been entirely maxed out, and because you are the primary owner on the deed, your signature was required to authorize it. The air in the room vanished. The numbers on the screen blurred. $75,000. 14 months ago, I whispered, doing the mental math. 14 months ago was when Jason claimed he was going on a spiritual retreat to Tulum with Chloe to heal his workplace trauma. A month after that, they spent 3 weeks in a luxury ski lodge in Aspen. He had told me Chloe's wellness business was booming and she was treating him. He forged my signature, I said. The words tasted like ash in my mouth. He stole the equity out of the house to fund his vacations with his father's wife. Eleanor's face was stone cold. She printed out the loan origination document and slid it across the desk. There, on the bottom line, was my name, Margaret Elizabeth Hayes. But the loop of the M was too wide. The slant of the H was entirely wrong. It was a sloppy, arrogant forgery, notarized by someone who clearly hadn't asked for an ID, likely one of Chloe's shady business contacts. This is bank fraud, Margaret, Eleanor said, her voice dropping into her professional, ruthless register. It is a federal crime. Furthermore, it constitutes identity theft. If we take this to the police, Jason will be arrested. He could face 5 to 10 years in federal prison. The bank will investigate, the notary will lose their license, and the debt will be cleared from your name. She handed me a pen. Say the word, and I will have the police at his door before lunch. I stared at the forged signature. I thought about the little boy who used to hold my hand so tightly when crossing the street. I thought about the teenager who had cried into my shoulder when his father didn't show up for his high school graduation. And then I thought about the 35-year-old man who had looked me in the eye 24 hours ago, called me a loser, and plotted to manipulate me out of my life savings to impress a grifter. Tears pricked the corners of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. The mother in me was howling in agony, but the survivor in me, the woman who had rebuilt her life from scratch, was calculating. If I called the police, Jason would go to jail, but he would play the victim. He would tell the world and himself that his cruel, controlling mother had him locked up over a misunderstanding. Chloe would rally behind him, launching GoFundMe campaigns for his legal defense, painting me as the villain. No, prison was too easy. Prison would give him an excuse. I wanted him to feel the absolute, crushing weight of the real world. I wanted him to watch his own arrogant choices dismantle his life brick by brick. I pushed the pen back across the desk. "No police," I said. Eleanor looked surprised. "Margaret, you are on the hook for $75,000, plus the primary mortgage. If you default, the bank will seize the house, but they could also come after your other assets to cover the difference." "I know," I said, my mind working faster than it had in years. "But the Sycamore house is in a highly desirable neighborhood. The property value has skyrocketed. Even with the primary mortgage and this fraudulent HELOC, there is still equity left. If the bank forecloses, they will auction the house. They will take what they are owed from the sale, and the debt will be wiped clean. Protect my liquid assets. Move my cash and my personal apartment into an irrevocable trust by the end of the week. Make me legally untouchable." Eleanor's eyes widened slightly as she caught on to my strategy. "Once my assets are protected," I continued, my voice cold as ice, "I will stop paying both mortgages. The bank will initiate foreclosure. Jason will receive the eviction notice from the bank, not from me. He will have to answer to federal creditors. I want to draft a formal severance letter today. I am cutting him off." Eleanor leaned back in her chair, a look of profound respect crossing her features. "You are going to let the bank do your dirty work. You're going to let him sink his own ship." "He wanted independence," I said, standing up and smoothing my skirt. "I am going to give it to him. In writing." 3 days later, I sat at a small corner table in a local upscale coffee shop. It was Thursday afternoon. I had ordered a black coffee and placed a thick, sealed envelope on the table in front of me. At exactly 2:15 p.m., the bell above the door chimed, and Jason walked in. He was dressed in a tailored linen shirt, doubtless picked out by Chloe, and sunglasses that he kept on even inside the dimly lit cafe. He walked with a swagger, a distinct arrogance of a man who believed he held all the cards. Chloe's plan was clearly in motion. He thought I had called this meeting to grovel, to beg for his forgiveness, to offer him whatever he wanted just to restore the peace. He slid into the chair across from me, not bothering to take off his sunglasses. He didn't order a drink. "Look, Mom," he started, his tone dripping with practiced condescension. "I'm glad you reached out. Chloe and I have been talking, and we're willing to forgive the toxic energy you brought to dinner on Sunday. But there have to be boundaries moving forward. We feel that your financial control over my living situation is stunting my personal growth. We think it's time to discuss selling the Sycamore house." I didn't blink. I didn't interrupt. I just let him recite the script Chloe had written for him. "We figure," he continued, leaning back and crossing his arms, "that with the market right now, you can sell it, take your initial investment back, and give me half the equity as a launch pad. It's the right thing to do to heal our relationship." I looked at the son I had birthed, raised, and bankrupted myself for. I felt absolutely nothing. The cord wasn't just cut, it was cauterized. I reached forward and slid the thick envelope across the table. "What's this?" he asked, a smirk playing on his lips. "The listing agreement?" "Open it," I said quietly. Jason picked up the envelope, tore the flap, and pulled out the crisp legal documents Eleanor had prepared. He flipped to the first page. His smirk faltered. "What the hell is a declaration of financial severance?" he muttered, his eyes scanning the dense legal jargon. "It means," I said, my voice perfectly measured, "that as of 9 o'clock this morning, I have canceled the auto pay on the primary mortgage for the Sycamore house. I have canceled the homeowner's insurance. I have removed my credit card from the water, gas, and electric utilities. And I have signed the title of the Honda over to you, meaning the insurance is now your legal responsibility. If you do not insure it by midnight, your license will be suspended." Jason ripped his sunglasses off. His eyes were wide, the arrogance evaporating into raw, unfiltered panic. "Mom, you can't do that. The mortgage is $3,000 a month. I don't have that kind of money. The house will go into foreclosure." "I know," I said. "The bank will be sending the initial default notice in 30 days. You have about 60 days before the sheriff shows up to change the locks." "Are you insane?" he hissed, leaning over the table, his face turning red. "You're going to ruin your own credit. You own the house." I leaned forward, mirroring his posture, but my face was carved from stone. "My assets are protected in an irrevocable trust, Jason. My credit score is irrelevant to me now, but your living situation is entirely relevant to you." He scoffed, a desperate, breathless sound. "You're doing this because you're mad about dinner? Because Chloe called you out? This is exactly the toxic, controlling behavior we were talking about. You're trying to punish me." "No, Jason," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper that made him freeze. "I'm not punishing you for dinner. I am punishing you for the $75,000 home equity line of credit you fraudulently opened in my name 14 months ago." All the color drained from his face. The red flush of anger was instantly replaced by a sickly, chalky white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Tulum," I said smoothly. "Aspen, the designer clothes. I saw the origination documents, Jason. I saw the signature. It was a sloppy forgery." "Mom, he stammered, his hands beginning to shake. "I was going to pay it back. Chloe's business is about to take off. We just needed a bridge loan. I didn't want to worry you." "You committed federal bank fraud," I corrected him. "My lawyer advised me to call the police. She told me you would face 5 to 10 years in a federal penitentiary." Jason swallowed hard. I could see the pulse pounding frantically in his neck. "Please," he whispered, the fake independence completely shattered. He looked like a terrified child. "Mom, please don't call the police. I'll fix it. I'll get a job. Chloe can take out a business loan and pay it off, please." I picked up my purse and stood up from the table. "I didn't call the police, Jason," I said, looking down at him, "because putting you in a cell would give you someone else to blame. I am not going to be your warden, and I am certainly no longer your mother." I pushed my chair in. "The second mortgage requires a $2,000 monthly minimum payment. With the primary mortgage and the utilities, you need to find about $6,000 a month, starting right now, just to keep the lights on and the bank at bay. You wanted independence from my toxic money. You have it." "Mom, wait," he pleaded, half standing from his chair, reaching out toward me. "Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do?" I paused, looking at him one last time. "Ask Chloe," I said. "I hear her vibrations are very high this time of year." I turned and walked out of the coffee shop, stepping into the crisp afternoon air. I didn't look back. The weekend that followed my meeting with Jason was the most peaceful 48 hours I had experienced in 2 decades. I didn't check my phone. I didn't anxiously monitor my bank app to see if a utility bill had suddenly spiked. I spent Saturday morning at the farmer's market, buying fresh hydrangeas and a jar of expensive local honey. Indulgences I usually denied myself because I was always quietly hoarding pennies for Jason's next inevitable crisis. On Sunday, it rained. It was a torrential, relentless downpour that battered against the windows of my apartment. I sat in my velvet armchair with a cup of chamomile tea, watching the water streak down the glass. Somewhere across town, in the house I had paid for, a much fiercer storm was making landfall. The silence broke on Monday morning. My phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. The caller ID flashed Sarah's name. My daughter rarely called during her work hours unless it was an absolute emergency. I picked it up, bracing myself. "Mom," Sarah said, her voice a mixture of breathless disbelief and raw anxiety. "What on earth did you do?" I took a slow sip of my coffee. "Good morning to you too, sweetheart. I assume your brother has been in touch?" "In touch? He's been practically vibrating out of his skin." Sarah let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "He called me at 6 o'clock this morning. He was hyperventilating, Mom. He told me you lost your mind, that you're maliciously letting the Sycamore house go into foreclosure, and that you cut off his car insurance. He begged me for a $5,000 bridge loan to cover his immediate expenses. He said if I didn't help him, he'd be out on the street." "And what did you tell him?" I asked, feeling a brief flare of maternal protectiveness for Sarah. She had her own mortgage, her own life. She shouldn't have to carry his weight. I told him absolutely not, Sarah said firmly. I told him I don't have $5,000 just lying around to fund his lifestyle. But Mom, is it true? Did you really cut him off entirely? I did, I said, my voice steady. I pulled the plug, Sarah. The house, the car, the bills, all of it. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. Mom, I've been waiting for you to do this for 10 years, but the house? You put so much of your own money into that place. You're just going to let the bank take it? Sarah, listen to me very carefully, I said, leaning against the counter. There is something Jason didn't tell you this morning. 14 months ago, Jason forged my signature and took out a $75,000 home equity line of credit against the Sycamore house. He maxed it out. He used it to pay for his vacations with Chloe and to fund her ridiculous lifestyle. Sarah gasped. The sound was sharp, like she had been physically struck. He forged your signature? Mom, that's a felony. That's federal fraud. I know, I said quietly. Eleanor Vance pulled the records. I have the forged documents in my possession. Did you call the police? She demanded, her protective instincts flaring up. Mom, you have to press charges. He stole from you. He could have ruined you. I'm not calling the police, Sarah. I've protected my assets. But I am not paying off his stolen debt. If I press charges, he gets to play the martyr. He gets to tell the world that his cruel mother put him in a cage. But if I just walk away, he has to face the bank, the creditors, and the reality of his own actions. He has to save himself, or he has to sink. My God, Sarah whispered. He really thought he could just steal from you and you'd never find out, or that you'd just cover for him like always. She paused, taking a shaky breath. He told me he was going to Dad's house today. He said Dad would understand and help him sort this out. I couldn't help the dry, bitter chuckle that escaped my lips. Let him go to Robert, I said. Let the two of them figure it out. It is no longer my circus, and those are no longer my monkeys. We hung up a few minutes later, Sarah promising to keep her distance from Jason's fallout. I felt a profound sense of pride in my daughter. She had survived the wreckage of our family with her spine intact. I didn't have to wait long to hear how Jason's visit to his father went. Tuesday evening, as the sun was dipping below the horizon, casting long, bruised shadows across my living room floor, my phone rang again. This time it was Robert. I stared at the screen for a full minute before answering. Hello, Robert, I said, keeping my tone as neutral as if I were speaking to a telemarketer. Margaret, Robert barked. His voice had that familiar, pompous edge, the tone of a man who believed his mere presence commanded authority. What the hell is going on with Jason? He came to my house yesterday looking like a ghost. He says you've completely lost your grip on reality. You're letting his house go into foreclosure over a petty argument at dinner? It wasn't a petty argument, Robert. And it isn't his house. It's mine. Or rather, it belongs to the bank now. You are being incredibly vindictive, Robert scolded, stepping effortlessly into his role as the morally superior patriarch, a role he only played when it cost him nothing. He's our son, Margaret. You don't just abandon your child because his wife hurt your feelings. Chloe is very intuitive. She sensed your hostile energy from the moment you walked in. You're punishing Jason because you're jealous of the bond he has with her. I closed my eyes, taking a deep, centering breath. It was astounding how a man could live on this earth for 74 years and learn absolutely nothing. Robert, I said smoothly, cutting through his self-righteous monologue. If you are so deeply concerned about your son's housing situation, you are more than welcome to pay his mortgages. It's about $6,000 a month, give or take. Step up to the plate. Be the father you always pretended to be in the country club newsletters. He scoffed loudly. I just might, Margaret. Unlike you, I don't use my money to manipulate my children. I'm going to meet with my broker tomorrow morning. I'll pull the funds from my liquid investment accounts and cover his arrears. I will show him what unconditional love actually looks like. Be my guest, Robert, I said, and pressed the end call button. I slept soundly that night. The next afternoon, the phone rang again. It was Robert. I almost didn't answer, anticipating another lecture on my moral failings. But when I swiped the green button and lifted the receiver to my ear, the voice on the other end didn't sound like Robert at all. It sounded like a man who had just watched his entire world burn to the ground. Margaret, he whispered. His voice was hoarse, stripped of all its usual arrogance. It sounded thin, reedy, and incredibly old. I'm here, Robert. Did you speak with your broker? The money, Robert choked out, the sound catching in his throat like a sob. The money is gone. I sat up straight, putting my book down on the side table. What do you mean the money is gone? I logged into the joint accounts this morning before calling the broker, Robert said, his words tumbling out in a panicked, disjointed rush. The high-yield savings, the mutual funds I hadn't locked into the retirement trust. It's gone, Margaret. All of it. There's barely $2,000 left. I frowned, a cold chill of realization creeping down my spine. Robert, that was over $150,000. Did you get hacked? No, he sobbed, the sound pathetic and hollow. It was Chloe. I didn't say anything. I just let the silence pull the rest of the confession out of him. I confronted her, Robert continued, his voice breaking. She didn't even deny it. She said her wellness center was struggling. The retreats weren't booking. She said she needed capital to keep the lease on the commercial space, and she was going to pay it back once the energetic blockages in the business cleared. Margaret, she bled me dry. She's been siphoning $10,000–$15,000 a month for a year and a half. I never checked the statements because I trusted her. The grand cosmic irony of it all settled over me like a heavy velvet blanket. Robert, the man who had left me because I was too practical and boring, the man who had chased the shimmering illusion of a younger, spiritual wife, had been played for an absolute fool. The woman who constantly preached about toxic energy was a financial vampire. And the best part? Jason had gone to Robert for a bailout, only to accidentally force Robert to open the books and discover his own ruin. By cutting Jason off, I had inadvertently detonated the bomb ticking under Robert's life. I'm sorry, Robert, I said. And surprisingly, a small part of me meant it. I wouldn't wish the betrayal of a spouse on my worst enemy, but I also wasn't going to save him. You chose her. You let her manage your life. She's packing her bags, Robert wept. She said she can't be in a low-vibrational environment right now. She's leaving me, Margaret. What am I going to do about Jason? Nothing, I said softly. You have nothing left to give him, Robert. You both have to face the music now. I hung up. 2 hours later, the final boss of this miserable circus finally showed her face. My phone buzzed. A text message from a number I had never saved, but knew by heart. Pick up the phone, Margaret. We need to talk. I poured myself a glass of iced water, walked over to my desk, and opened my laptop. I woke up the screen, navigating to the encrypted folder Eleanor had sent me days ago. Then I dialed Chloe's number. She answered on the first ring. You really think you're clever, don't you? Chloe hissed. The honeyed spiritual guru voice was completely gone. She sounded like a cornered rat, vicious, panicked, and dangerous. Hello, Chloe. I hear you're having a difficult afternoon, I said, clicking open a PDF file on my screen. You did this on purpose, she snarled. You cut Jason off knowing he'd go whining to Robert, knowing Robert would check the accounts. You orchestrated this to ruin my marriage. Don't flatter yourself, I replied smoothly. I cut Jason off because he stole from me. You ruined your own marriage when you decided your husband's retirement fund was your personal piggy bank. You listen to me, you bitter old hag, Chloe spat, her breathing ragged. I am not going down quietly. I know people at your country club. I have thousands of followers online. I will get on Facebook Live tonight and tell everyone exactly what kind of mother you are. I'll tell them how you financially abused your son, how you abandoned him, how you're a miserable, controlling narcissist. I'll make sure you can't show your face in this town again. And if the bank comes after Jason for that loan, I'll testify that you authorized it and just forgot because your mind is slipping. She was going for the throat. It was the classic narcissist's playbook. Darvo, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. She thought the threat of public humiliation would terrify a woman of my generation. She thought I cared about the gossip of women I barely liked. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't defend myself. I just clicked my mouse. Chloe, are you near your computer? I asked calmly. What? She snapped, thrown off by my tone. Open your email, I just sent you something. I heard the muffled sound of keys tapping on her end, followed by a tense silence. What is this? She asked, her voice faltering slightly. That, I said, leaning back in my chair. is a copy of Jason's tax return from last year, the one he filed using the CPA you recommended. Look at Schedule C, line 27. More silence, then a sharp intake of breath. You see, I continued, my voice taking on the patient, instructive tone of a schoolteacher. When Jason forged my signature for that $75,000 loan, he funneled $50,000 of it directly into your LLC. But instead of declaring it as a gift or an investment, your accountant classified it as a consulting expense to offset Jason's taxable income, while you likely buried it in your books to hide it from Robert. It's a very messy, very illegal paper trail. You stole his tax returns, she stammered, the venom in her voice replaced by pure, icy dread. I didn't steal anything. He used my home address for his mail, and as his primary financial guarantor, I kept copies of everything to protect myself, which turns out to be a very good habit. I took a sip of my water. If you post a single word about me on Facebook, Chloe, or if you ever speak my name at that country club, or if you even look in my direction again, I will forward this entire PDF, along with the forged loan documents, directly to the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS. The silence on the line was absolute. I could practically hear her heart hammering against her ribs. The IRS doesn't care about your high vibrations, Chloe, I whispered softly into the phone. They care about tax evasion and federal bank fraud. You and Jason will share a cell block. Margaret, please, she whispered. The spiritual coach was dead. The grifter had been caught. Pack your bags, Chloe. Get out of Robert's house. Get out of my family. And never, ever contact me again. I didn't wait for her to respond. I hung up the phone, walked over to my filing cabinet, and locked it. The dominoes hadn't just fallen. They had shattered, and I was standing perfectly unscathed outside the blast zone. The heavy machinery of consequence is remarkably slow, but it is absolute. For the next 2 months, I watched from a quiet, serene distance as the life my son had built on my dime crumbled into dust. I didn't gloat. I didn't send him "I told you so" text messages. I simply let the silence do the work. I later learned from Sarah, who was watching the disaster unfold through a network of mutual acquaintances, that Jason and Chloe's relationship had deteriorated into a toxic war zone within days of my phone call. Stripped of Robert's stolen retirement funds and my endless stream of bailout money, the illusion of their high vibrational romance evaporated. Poverty, as it turns out, is a terrible environment for a spiritual guru, but the most beautiful piece of justice, the one that still makes me smile when I sip my morning coffee, was something I didn't even orchestrate. I had fully intended to keep my promise to Chloe. I never sent her fraudulent tax documents to the IRS. I didn't have to. Jason did it for me. Desperation makes people do incredibly stupid things. About 3 weeks before the bank's final eviction deadline, Jason panicked. He marched into a local branch of the First National Bank, demanding a hardship modification on the forged second mortgage. The loan officer, a man who actually did his job, asked Jason for proof of current or future income to justify restructuring the debt. In a move of staggering arrogance and stupidity, Jason handed over a thumb drive containing all of Chloe's business projections, including the commingled ledgers, the fake consulting expenses, and the tax returns he had used to funnel my stolen equity into her LLC. He thought he was proving that a massive windfall was just around the corner. Instead, he handed a federal bank undeniable, documented proof of money laundering and tax fraud. The bank's underwriting department flagged the file immediately. By federal law, they were required to report the discrepancy to the authorities. Within 48 hours, the IRS froze Chloe's business accounts. The state tax board initiated an immediate, aggressive audit. Chloe, facing imminent federal charges and completely out of other people's money, packed her beige linen clothes into her SUV and fled to her sister's house in Oregon, leaving Jason completely alone in a house he was about to lose. Eviction day arrived on a freezing Tuesday morning in late November. I didn't plan to be there. I had a hair appointment and a lunch date with a girlfriend. But the route to the salon took me right past the mouth of Sycamore Drive. A sudden quiet urge pulled at my steering wheel. I turned down the street and parked half a block away from the house I had bought 10 years ago. The scene was chaotic, humiliating, and brutally final. 2 county sheriff's deputies were standing on the front porch, arms crossed, while a crew of bank-hired movers dragged Jason's life out onto the dead grass. I watched as the gray velvet couch, the one Chloe had insisted they buy because my old floral one had stagnant energy, was dumped unceremoniously onto the curb. Boxes of kitchenware, unbagged clothes, and a flat-screen television followed, piling up like trash on collection day. Jason was sitting on a plastic storage bin at the end of the driveway. He looked entirely defeated. He was unshaven, his hair a mess, wearing a wrinkled sweatshirt. He held his phone to his ear, his posture hunched. From my car, I couldn't hear the conversation, but I didn't need to. I knew exactly who he was calling. He was calling his father. He was begging Robert for a couch to sleep on, for a corner of the basement, for just a few days to figure things out. I watched Jason pull the phone away from his ear, staring at the screen in disbelief. Robert had hung up on him. Robert, who was currently sitting in an empty house, fielding calls from his own bankruptcy lawyers because of Chloe, had finally locked his doors. Jason dropped his head into his hands. He had no wife. He had no father. He had no house, no credit, and no car. Because without my insurance money, the state had suspended his registration, and he had been forced to sell the Honda to a scrapyard just to buy groceries. He was 35 years old, and he was finally, terrifyingly alone in the world. I put my car in drive and pulled away from the curb. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't honk. I just drove toward the rest of my life, leaving him to figure out his. Winter thawed into a crisp, hopeful spring. 6 months passed without a single word from my son. During those months, my life expanded in ways I hadn't thought possible. Without the constant, draining anxiety of managing a grown man's crises, I found myself sleeping through the night. I joined a garden club. I took Sarah on a 10-day cruise to Alaska, first class, paid for in cash. For the first time in my 72 years, I was living entirely for myself. Then, on a Tuesday afternoon in early May, my phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Mom, it's Jason. I know you probably never want to see me again, but I'm off shift at 4 p.m. today. I'd really like to buy you a cup of coffee. Please." I stared at the screen. The old Margaret would have dropped everything, her heart fluttering with the desperate hope that her little boy had finally come to his senses. The new Margaret took a moment to water her orchids before replying. "The diner on 4th Street. 4:30. I only have 20 minutes. When I walked into the diner, I almost didn't recognize him. Jason was sitting in a corner booth wearing a dark blue polo shirt with the logo of a local hardware store stitched over the breast pocket. His hands, usually perfectly manicured, looked rough and dry. The arrogant swagger, the entitlement that used to roll off him in waves, was entirely gone. He just looked tired. I slid into the booth across from him. He had already ordered me a black coffee. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly, his eyes meeting mine only briefly before dropping to his hands. "Hello, Jason. You're working at the hardware store?" He nodded, swallowing hard. "Yeah, full-time. I rent a room in a house near the industrial park. I take the bus to work." He let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Turns out, having a felony fraud investigation on your record limits your career options. The bank agreed not to press federal charges if I surrendered the house without a legal fight and set up a payment plan for the stolen equity. I'll be paying them back until I'm 50. I took a sip of my coffee. Actions have consequences. I'm glad you're finally meeting them. He looked up at me, and for the first time in over a decade, his eyes were completely clear. There was no manipulation there, no Chloe whispering in his ear. "I'm sorry," he said. The words cracked in the middle. Tears welled up in his eyes, spilling over his lashes and tracking down his face. "Mom, I am so deeply, incredibly sorry. For what I said at that dinner. For the loan. For taking you for granted. For everything." He wiped his face with the back of his rough hand. "You gave me everything, and I treated you like a bank account. I blamed you for Dad leaving because it was easier than admitting that I wasn't man enough to stand on my own 2 feet. You aren't a loser, Mom. I was, and I'm paying for it every single day." I sat back against the vinyl booth, letting his apology wash over me. It was genuine. The pain in his voice was real, forged in the fires of actual, grueling reality. He had finally grown up, but he had to lose everything to do it. "I accept your apology, Jason," I said gently. A tiny spark of hope lit up his exhausted face. "You do?" "I do," I affirmed. "I forgive you. Carrying anger at my age is terrible for the joints." He let out a shaky breath, reaching across the table as if to take my hand. "Thank you. Mom, I'm going to do better. I'm going to work my way up at the store. Maybe in a few months when I have some savings, I could come over for Sunday dinner again. Just you, me, and Sarah." I looked at his outstretched hand, resting on the Formica table. I didn't reach out to take it. "No, Jason," I said softly. The spark of hope in his eyes instantly died. "No? Forgiveness is for my peace of mind," I explained, my voice steady, carrying the weight of a woman who finally knew her own worth. "But trust is something entirely different. You broke my trust in a way that cannot be repaired over a cup of coffee, or even 6 months of hard work. I am glad you are standing on your own. I truly am. But you are going to stay on your own." He pulled his hand back, looking as though I had slapped him. "You're never going to let me back in your life? I will text you on your birthday, Jason, and on Christmas. But my home is my sanctuary now, and my finances are permanently closed to you. We are not going back to the way things were." He nodded slowly, tears falling freely now, accepting the heavy, immovable boundary I had just placed between us. He had asked for boundaries at that horrible dinner. Now he had them. He wiped his eyes with a napkin and took a deep breath, trying to regain his composure. "I understand. I deserve that. I wish things had been different. I drove by the Sycamore house last week just to look at it. There were contractors everywhere. The neighbor told me someone bought it in cash at the bank's foreclosure auction. They're completely gutting the inside." A bittersweet smile touched my lips. "Yes, I know. They're turning the den into a nursery." Jason frowned, confused. "How do you know that?" I picked up my purse, sliding out of the booth. I looked down at the man I had raised, feeling a profound, peaceful detachment. "Because I was the one who bought it at the auction, Jason." His jaw dropped. He stared at me, completely speechless. "I bought it back from the bank for pennies on the dollar," I explained calmly. "And the day the deed cleared, I transferred it into an irrevocable trust for your sister." "Sarah?" he whispered, stunned. "Yes, Sarah," I said, my voice ringing with absolute clarity. "Sarah, who never asked me for a dime. Sarah, who paid her own way through nursing school. Sarah, who is expecting her first child this winter and needed a home with a yard. I spent 35 years investing all my resources into the child who demanded it. I decided it was time to invest in the child who actually deserved it." Jason sat frozen in the booth, the reality of my words crushing whatever last illusion he was holding on to. His inheritance, his safety net, his childhood home. It wasn't just gone. It was given to the sister he had always looked down upon. "Goodbye, Jason," I said. "I truly wish you the best." I didn't wait for him to respond. I turned and walked out of the diner, the bell chiming cheerfully as I pushed the door open. The afternoon sun was brilliant and warm, casting golden light over the pavement. I walked to my car, my steps light, my shoulders entirely unburdened. I didn't have a cape anymore. I didn't need one. I got into the driver's seat, rolled down the windows to let the fresh spring air in, and turned the key. The engine hummed to life. I pulled out of the parking lot, heading toward Sarah's new house to help her pick out paint colors for the nursery. I was Margaret Elizabeth Hayes. I was 72 years old, and my life was finally, beautifully, my own.